So the reason for this PowerPoint is to give you a background on writing literary arguments. All of you have taken either 1190 or 1220. Now 1220 was a Composition 2 class that focused on literature, the 1190 on social issues. So this will be more review for the 1220 people, and for the 1190 people, argument is still argument. This will be a little bit more specific as far as literary argument, however, and it'll be good review for the people who took the 1220 class. Anyway, to begin with, when you're writing any argument, it's necessary to choose a debatable topic, and this is true with literary arguments. So, and to ensure that you have one, what you want to do is take the opposite side of the argument you want to make. And if you can see people agreeing with that point of view and other people agreeing with your point of view, you have a debatable topic. You don't want to just have a statement of fact that doesn't offer any controversy. All right. So once that is done, you then need to look at the work you're writing on, whichever story that you're taking from the book, and ensure that there's enough evidence within that story to provide you with enough depth to fill the number of pages you need to write. So this means determine if the subject you have chosen is too broad. That means it will require many more pages than the maximum you're supposed to write, or if the subject is too narrow, that there will not be enough information to fill the minimum number of pages you are to write on. Usually it's the latter of not being able to fill enough. So a suggestion is to do a Google search on your topic that you've decided on. If Google comes back with 100,000 sites, you may have something that's too broad. If it comes back with only 2, you know you have something that's too narrow. So that's just a trick that you might be able to use. But so you want to be like Goldilocks. Make sure you got something right in the middle, not too broad, not too narrow. All right. So once you have the topic, you then need a debatable thesis. What specifically are you going to say about this topic? The thesis needs to be a single declarative sentence. Please try not to have a thesis that's 2 sentences. You tend to lose focus when that occurs. It should be very clear in its message and as concise as you can possibly make it, and should definitively convey your point. It should be clear what it is you're wanting to say with this paper. Again, you need to ensure there's enough material you can draw from the literary work to support the thesis. You also need to ask yourself if sources other than the work, sources such as literary criticism, might be needed. For the first essay, I'm not requiring that. For the research paper, of course, you are. But you still may want to use outside sources on this first paper. All right, now let's take into consideration your audience. For this course, we will assume that the audiences for all your papers are familiar with the works you're writing about, that they have read those works. All right, so that way you don't have to summarize the entire thing. You do have to consider at a minimum with the audience is the education level of your audience. Please don't say something like this is for a general audience. That doesn't give us any kind of specifics, and it's really sloppy writing. For example, I would not write a paper for high school audiences with the same diction and vocabulary that I would write for college graduates. I would write those papers very differently, even though it's the same paper. So good writing tends to reflect this considerate audience. So assume that your audience is skeptical towards your argument also, that that they'll listen to you, but they're not quite sure if they believe what you're saying. And therefore, it's your job to convince them to see it your way. Now, to this end, what works best is a conciliatory approach. And what I mean by that is your tone is respectful of their skepticism, respectful of their values, and respectful of their intelligence. All right, and so you're saying, I understand why you're skeptical of this. You've got good reason to be skeptical. However, show them respectfully why you were right. Now, for support, which is going to be the majority of your paper, use direct quotations for the story itself and then refer to sections that support your statements by summarizing those sections. Now, please, as I already said, do not write long summaries of scenes or parts of the story or of the entire story. This tends to make a paper sound like a report, not a literary argument. We want your ideas about the work. We don't want to learn everything there is to know about this work. We want to know whatever it is we need to know that supports your particular ideas. For the first essay, you will not need additional sources other than the story itself. However, you may decide that the essay could use some strengthening, and outside sources could provide this. If you do use the outside sources, make sure you document those in MLA form. Now, what's very important is your credibility as a writer when you're writing these academic papers. And we want the audience to realize you are someone whose arguments should be taken seriously. And this is reliant on a number of factors, the most important of which is the fact that you are knowledgeable regarding the subject. Then you must present yourself properly by presenting a fair, unbiased tone. The way you accomplish this is by writing in an unbiased manner, avoiding sarcasm and exaggeration, also writing in a manner that conveys a confidence in your ideas without sounding arrogant. So to this end, the confidence, please stay away from weak terms such as I suppose and I think. The audience assumes already that your statements are what you think, otherwise why would you be arguing the point? Of course this is what you think. Saying something like I suppose just makes whatever comes after that sound very weak, so try to stay away from that as much as possible. Now, also for your credibility, make sure you do not distort evidence or sources. So the way you do this is by quoting accurately using the correct lead-in verbs. And what I mean by that is if your source just says something, you don't then say that she argued that. That's a much stronger word than just says. So be careful of how you use those lead-in verbs. Also, be careful of quoting out of context and changing the meaning of what the author had actually written. I'm sure we've all seen movies because the movie poster or commercial said some critic said that the movie was extraordinary. However, the commercial or the poster forgot to print the full quote where the critic actually said it was extraordinary and how bad it was. All right, so please be careful of that. Also stay away from fallacies and also from appealing to people's emotions. When that's taken to extreme, it's known as propaganda. And finally, here's the standard organization for the argument. You have your introduction where you lay your groundwork. Within the introduction, you normally have your thesis. Then you give whatever background might be needed. Again, your audience has read the story, so there'd be very little background needed. Then, and the bulk of the essay should be here, is in the support. If your audience in general, you think a large portion are going to think of some counter argument, then you need to rebut that. Normally, literary arguments don't have counter arguments, however, and you need not worry about it. And then finally, you wrap up with the conclusion. My one caveat for the conclusion, please do not add any new information that we have not already seen in the paper in the conclusion. Otherwise, it's no longer a concluding paragraph. All right, so that should give you a good review of our literary arguments, and I look forward to receiving yours next week.